In a small room in the California desert, behind an ordinary door, 3 white refrigerators hum against the heat. Inside them are not vaccines, not film, not anything you would expect. Just glass jars, pickle jars, baby food jars. And inside those jars sits the future of an entire landscape, waiting. Most people drive past this place and see nothing. They have no idea what is being kept alive here or why it may already be too late to wait. Let me start with a truth that sounds like a lie. The desert is not empty. We are taught to see it as a wasteland, a blank space on the map. Miles of sand and rock and nothing. The part of the long drive you sleep through on the way to somewhere greener. But that picture is wrong. And it is wrong in a way that has quietly cost us a great deal. The California desert covers nearly a quarter of the entire state. And within that sun-baked expanse lives something almost no one expects. Around 2,400 plant species grow here. That is close to a third of all the plant life in California, crowded into the very place we assumed was barren. California sits inside one of only 36 biodiversity hotspots on the entire planet, and a great deal of that richness is hidden right here, in the ground most people never look at twice. Look closer, and the desert begins to move. A bee sleeps folded inside the lavender petals of a Mojave aster, waiting for the petals to open with the morning sun. A blister beetle darts between stems. A desert tortoise, the largest land turtle in the country, grazes slowly on plants that took the whole year to grow. Burrowing owls watch from the shadows. None of this exists without the plants. The plants are the floor that everything else stands on, and the plants begin, every single one of them, with a seed. Which brings us back to those 3 humming refrigerators in the town of Joshua Tree. Inside them sit more than 5 million seeds. They come from nearly 250 different species, gathered one careful handful at a time from across the California desert. The collection has grown so large and become so important that people have started calling it a Noah's Ark for Southern California. A backup copy of an entire living world, kept cold in a back room. And here is where almost everyone guesses wrong. If you had to say why anyone would lock away 5 million seeds, you would probably reach for the obvious answer. A doomsday vault, an ark for the end of the world, a safe place to keep nature on file in case the worst ever happens. It is a reasonable guess. It is also not the real reason. The truth is quieter and far more urgent, because the people who built this place are not waiting for some distant catastrophe. The catastrophe has already started, and these seeds are not being saved for the end of the world. They are being spent right now to rebuild a desert that is burning in front of us. But to understand what these seeds are for, you first have to understand what has already been lost. For most of its history, the Mojave almost never burned. Fire was so rare here that in some places a single patch of ground might go more than 100 years between flames. The plants grew up in a world without fire. They never learned to survive it. They never had to. Then the world changed. Invasive grasses crept in and dried into a carpet of fuel where bare ground used to be. The summers grew hotter, the droughts grew longer, and the desert, a place that was never built to burn, began to catch fire on a scale no one had ever seen. What makes this so dangerous is the trap it sets. In a healthy desert, the native plants grow far apart, with open ground between them, and fire struggles to leap from one to the next. The invasive grasses fill in those gaps. They sprout fast after a wet winter, then dry into tinder by summer, knitting the spaces between plants into one continuous fuse. A single spark can now run for miles, and after a fire clears the land, it is the same fast grasses that return first, even thicker than before, priming the ground to burn again. Scientists call it the grass and fire cycle, and once a desert falls into it, it can burn itself, over and over, out of the very form it has held for thousands of years. This is the spiral the seed bank is racing to break. In 2020, lightning sparked a fire on a place called Cima Dome, inside the Mojave National Preserve. Cima Dome held one of the most spectacular Joshua Tree forests on Earth. When the flames finally died, more than 1.3 million Joshua trees were gone. One of the great forests of the desert had been turned almost overnight into a graveyard of black silhouettes standing in the sand. 3 years later, in 2023, the York Fire tore through the same preserve and burned across more than 100 square miles. Between those two fires alone, field scientists estimate that around 2.5 million Joshua trees were killed. Walk into one of those burn zones today and you will find an eerie, silent moonscape. Scorched yuccas, the charred carcasses of cactus. The ground itself burned brown and black, with the ghosts of plants printed into the soil as ash. To lose a Joshua tree is to lose far more than a tree. The Joshua tree is what scientists call a keystone species, which means it holds up the lives of everything around it. Rare beetles burrow into it. Birds use it as the only perch for miles in every direction. Lizards, rodents, and insects all depend on it. Pull the keystone out of an arch, and the whole arch falls. Pull the Joshua tree out of the desert, and a whole community of life falls with it. And here is the cruelest part. The desert cannot simply grow it all back on its own. A Joshua tree grows at most about 2 inches a year. Some of the trees that burned were older than the country itself. They are not replaceable in a human lifetime or even in several. Worse, the Joshua tree has lost the partner that once carried it across the land. Thousands of years ago, giant ground sloths roamed this desert and ate the fruit, spreading the seeds for miles as they wandered. The sloths went extinct long ago. Today, the seeds must rely on small rodents and squirrels that do not travel nearly as far. So the trees spread slowly, painfully slowly, into a future that is heating up far faster than they can move. When biologists rushed in to replant the burned forests by hand, the desert showed them no mercy. In one major effort, only about 20% of the young Joshua trees they planted survived. One scientist described desert restoration plainly. "It is," she said, "a long tale of failed experiments. You try something, and it dies. You try something else, and it dies too. And once in a while, against the odds, something lives." This is the wall that everyone hits, and it is exactly the wall that the seed bank was built to break. Because here is the secret. Almost no one outside this work knows. There is a national shortage of seed. When a fire or a bulldozer strips a landscape bare, the people trying to heal it need native seed to put life back into the ground. And again, when they go looking for that seed, there is simply not enough of it to be found. You cannot rebuild a forest you do not have the seeds for. Across the country, restoration grinds to a halt, not for lack of will, but for lack of seed. And you cannot solve it by buying any seed off a shelf. This is the part that turns seed banking from a hobby into a science. A plant that grew in one valley may be subtly, invisibly tuned to that exact place. Its timing, its tolerance for heat, its thirst, all shaped by the specific patch of earth it came from. Drop in a seed from somewhere else, even the same species, and it may fail completely. As one of the scientists here puts it, you cannot just throw any seeds on the ground and walk away. The seed has to belong to the place. It has to be local. It has to be the right key for the right lock. That is what those 3 refrigerators really hold. Not a museum, not a tomb. A working supply line. A library of the right seeds, gathered from the right places, kept ready for the day the desert needs them. And in Southern California, that day is no longer a someday. That day is now. Matching the right seed to the right scar of land has become a science of its own. Researchers have begun building decision tools, sometimes called seed menus, that help restoration crews choose exactly which mix of native plants will take hold on a given site. They weigh the soil, the elevation, the rainfall, the way one species shelters another, and they design a custom blend tuned to that precise patch of ground. It turns replanting from a hopeful guess into something closer to a prescription. And none of it works without a steady, well-documented supply of local seed to draw from. The menu is useless if the pantry is bare. The seed bank is the pantry. The seed bank does not stand alone. It grew out of an organization that has spent the better part of 2 decades quietly buying back the desert, one parcel at a time. Since it was founded in 2006, this land trust has worked to protect ecologically precious ground across a desert region that stretches some 26 million acres, from the Mojave to the Colorado Desert. It has handed more tracts of land to the National Park System than any other group of its kind in the country, stitching protected wilderness back together acre by acre. The seed bank is the living heart of that work. Land protects the place. Seed protects its power to come back to life. The whole project began with one person and one idea. In 2016, a plant conservationist named Medina Asbel looked at the threats stacking up against the desert and asked a simple question. What if we could protect this place by protecting the seeds that make all of it possible? At first, the work was small. Volunteers donated whatever jars they had at home. Pickle jars, Gerber baby food jars, the little ones with the blue lids. One of those tiny jars still holds the seeds of a delicate purple wildflower, a kind of lupine native to California. From those humble beginnings grew one of the only seed banks in the state actively collecting the wild flora of the desert. The work itself is slow, patient, and deeply human. It begins on foot. Teams hike out across the desert, sometimes on warm spring days when the ground is briefly alive with color, and they search for ripe, healthy plants. When they find a good population, they do not strip it bare. They take only a careful share, enough to matter for a future restoration, but never so much that they harm the wild plants they are trying to protect. It is a constant balancing act between taking and leaving. Every collection is recorded with care. Not just what was gathered, but exactly where it came from, down to the precise spot on the map. That location is not a detail, it is the whole point. Because when the time comes to heal a burned hillside, you can reach for seed that grew on ground just like it, perfectly matched to the place it is going home to. Back at headquarters, the seeds face a test. It is called the KESQ test, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Staff open the seeds to check whether they are full and healthy inside, or whether insects and mold have hollowed them out. Only the good ones move on. Those healthy seeds are spread into paper bags on drying racks, where they slowly release their moisture. And finally, they are sealed into jars and slid into the cold of those refrigerators, where they can wait, alive but sleeping, for years and even decades. Inside, the variety is astonishing. Some seeds are light and wispy, ready to ride the wind. Some are skinny, some are round. Some are dense and dark like peppercorns. Others look almost like tiny pumpkin seeds. There are shades of brown and red and olive green. It is, in its own small way, a portrait of the whole desert, shrunk down and tucked into glass. But the bank is not only storing seeds, it is learning how to wake them up. For many desert plants, no one yet knows the trick. Some seeds need fire to break their dormancy. Some need a long cold spell, or the slow scrubbing of a flash flood, or a precise window of warmth and moisture that may come only once in a decade. So the team runs experiment after experiment, learning how each species germinates and how to coax it from seed into seedling, then writes those hard-won recipes down and shares them freely with other scientists. Every jar in those refrigerators is therefore two things at once: It is a packet of future plants, and it is a page of knowledge about how to bring a vanishing desert back. The bank is already lending seed to researchers studying how a warming climate is changing these very species, turning a store of life into a tool for understanding what is coming. And yes, the Joshua tree is in there too. At any given time, the bank holds around 70,000 Joshua tree seeds. Some of them may one day be planted not where their parents grew, but in cooler, higher ground, carried deliberately to places that will still be livable as the climate warms. It is a quiet, careful kind of hope. A bet that even a tree that grows 2 inches a year might still have a future if someone is willing to plan that far ahead. Now follow those seeds back out into the desert, and you can watch the rescue actually happen. In the burned woodlands of Joshua Tree National Park, crews have marked out small patches of ground and turned them into islands of recovery. On these restoration islands, they plant young Joshua trees grown from collected seed, along with the shrubs and grasses that naturally grow beside them. Each fragile seedling is wrapped in a cage of wire mesh, a shield against the rabbits and rodents that would otherwise eat the tender new growth before it ever has a chance. Workers carve shallow basins into the soil called seed pits, designed to catch and hold the rain. They lay down mulch. They time the planting for just before the winter rains, so the young plants get every possible drop of water. The idea behind these islands is beautifully simple. As the planted trees grow and begin to make seed of their own, they become living seed sources, slowly spilling new life outward into the scorched land around them. The crews are not just replanting trees, they are trying to restart the engine of the desert itself. It is hard work, and no one here pretends otherwise. They are honest about the grim odds. They are honest about how many seedlings die. But something remarkable keeps happening anyway. People keep showing up. Volunteers drive in from across the country and give up their weekends to kneel in the dirt and plant trees they will never see grow tall. On one of those planting days, among the volunteers was a 10-year-old boy from Wisconsin. His middle name was Joshua. His parents had named him after the tree. That is the part the doomsday story always misses. This was never really about hoarding nature against the apocalypse. It is about people choosing, right now, to put life back into the ground. And the reach of that choice goes far beyond any single tree. Remember, the plants are the floor that everything stands on. When you protect the desert plants, you are quietly protecting everything that leans on them. The desert tortoise that eats them, the burrowing owl that shelters near them, the countless pollinators that drink from their flowers. Save the seed, and you are not saving one species. You are saving a whole web of lives that most people will never even see. The world is beginning to notice. In 2023, the state of California awarded the project a grant of $3.2 million to grow far beyond those first 3 refrigerators. The plan is ambitious. Over the next 4 years, the seed bank aims to collect, process, and store seed from 300 more kinds of plants, pushing toward a capacity of 500. That is roughly a fifth of the entire flora of the desert, held safe and ready. The goal is to gather more than 2,000 pounds of seed and to make it available for healing damaged land all across the region. This small operation, born from donated pickle jars, is becoming a genuine lifeline for an entire ecosystem. Step back and you can see what these people have really built. It is not a vault sealed against the future, it is the opposite. It is a promise that there will be a future and a refusal to face it empty-handed. So think again about that quiet room and the soft hum of those 3 refrigerators in the heat. We started by calling the desert empty. By now, you know how wrong that is. The desert is one of the richest, oldest, most stubbornly alive places on the continent. And, tucked into glass jars in a back room, an ancient landscape is being kept on hold, not as a relic of what we are losing, but as the raw material of what we can still bring back. Some of these plants have lived through changes we can barely imagine. They are, as one of the scientists likes to say, profoundly old, carrying more history in their roots than we will ever hold in ours. To save their seeds is to reach across all of that time and place a small, deliberate bet on tomorrow. A seed is the simplest miracle there is. It is a whole living thing, an entire future, folded into something you could lose in the palm of your hand. It can sleep for years in the dark and the cold, asking for nothing, and then wake to water and warmth and become a forest. 5 million of them are resting in the California desert tonight, gathered by people who may never see most of them grow. They collected them anyway. They caged the seedlings and carved the seed pits and kneel in the burned ground anyway. Because somewhere out there is a child named after a tree and a desert worth coming back, and a quiet, unshakable belief that what was lost can still be planted again. Seeds, one of them put it, are life. And life, even here, especially here, is something worth holding on to.